And I said I was going to be doing short videos from now until... well, whenever the Danganronpa videos get finished. In the words of Tyler the Creator.
So that was a fucking lie.
Anyway, hopefully this time will be different, as there's no way I can make a video for an indie game longer than an hour or two. Right? Let's talk about Cuphead. Don't deal with the devil. Getting flashbacks to Detroit for this one, my first real contact with Cuphead wasn't that unique, as while I knew it was floating around in the ether, what made me put eyes onto it was the Dean Takahashi controversy. You know, the time a games journalist exposed themselves as being unable to play video games? Oh, wait a second, that doesn't narrow it down at all. Using the word exposed there is a bit funny as well, seeing as journalists do that in other senses. Man, remember when journalism was a profession to be proud of? Now no-name uncreative assholes on the internet do their job for them.
Hey, I may be no-name and uncreative, but I ain't an asshole, you dick.
I feel that if I'm going to begin anywhere, I should start with a disclaimer. I will be using footage of cartoons, by today's standard, that are racist. The golden era of cartoons was an artistically rich time period, but it also had a seedy underbelly. Just look up 1930s propaganda cartoons.
Here we are seeing Japanese King of SWAT.
I'm not gonna drop a strop at this because back then it was considered socially acceptable. This isn't me saying that it was or is now. We evolved as a culture and society to see that it was wrong. I'm just tired of presentism because I believe it is an uncritical way of looking at the past. Insert the dumb modern arguments made against H.P. Lovecraft. With that out of the way, I want to draw your attention to Komatsuzawa Hajime's Omochabako series Daisan wa Ihan Senkaya Hoyako Sanju Rokunin, translation Toy Box Series 3, Picture Book 1936, as this is the starting point for Cuphead. In the short, the island country of Japan is attacked by a horde of evil Mickeys riding on bats. While initially they are overwhelmed, the people of Japan call upon the heroes of the nation, including Golden Boy Sakata no Kentoki, Warrior Monk Musashibo Benkei, and the original James and the Giant Peach Momotaro. Momotaro win, Type Moon and Delight works! At around the 5-minute mark of the short, a character with a cup for a head is shown transforming into a tank. While this may seem innocuous at first, this is where the brothers Moldenhauer got the idea for Cuphead and could be considered the birthplace for the character in game. Well, in all actuality, the birthplace for Cuphead was Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. At least that's what an article from KillScreenDaily posits. The brothers Moldenhauer are Chad and Jared, who spent most of their childhood playing video games in their parents' basement with mutual friend and musician Christopher Madigan, or poring over one of the many VHS tapes centered around old cartoons that were either bought by one of the brothers or were gifted to them by friends or family. While the Moldenhauers did have other siblings, Chad and Jared in particularly grew up close, just a year apart in age, kicking back ideas and interests, and most importantly, a shared sense of taste. Whether it was animation or games, the two are in tune with each other, splurging over the likes of Fleischer Studios and the early works of Walt Disney to Contra 3 and Third Strike, to the point that an idea formed in their heads. Why don't we make a game? Thus, the two started working on an early prototype for Cuphead around 2000, but this version of the game was never meant to be. I couldn't say if it was time constraints, lack of skill, or some other third thing, but whatever it was, it shut down the project indefinitely. Moving away from the scrapped prototype, Chad moved to Oakville, Ontario to pursue a career in graphic design, while Jared stayed in Regina, working at the family business. Despite being 25 hours away by car, the two's relationship stayed strong. Chad's wife, Marija Moldenhauer, even jokingly commenting that Chad talks to his brother more than her. The idea for Cuphead was still alive and well, as though the two failed earlier in 2000, their resolve was tempered by a 2010 indie release, Super Meat Boy. Made by Edmund McMillan and Tommy Raffines, their work chronicled in the film Indie Game the Movie, which, tangent time, oof. The only person who looks good in that film is Edmund. I can't remember how Tommy was in the film, as it has been a moment and he wasn't as prominent as Edmund as Phil Fish comes across.
What do you think about the recently Japanese game?
Is it what is about Japanese games that inspired us?
Recent.
Recent
I'm sorry.
They suck. I'm sorry. Like, you guys need to get with the times and make better interfaces and like update your technology. We're totally kicking your ass. Back then, you guys were the king of the world, but your time has passed.
is a sociopathic narcissist, while Jonathan Blow is an obsessive, pretentious perfectionist, and both of them, alongside Keiji Inafune, are the reason why the late aughts and early 2010s saw a lot of casual racism against Japanese developers, as all three pushed the idea that Japanese developers couldn't make games, which spilled into many journalistic works of the era, and we still see the aftermath to this day. Super Meat Boy paved the way for a majority of indie games to come, Cuphead included. Development officially kicked off for the game in 2010, with Chad and Jared settling on making Cuphead a homage to the pillars of their childhood. This was in spite of the brothers having no formal background in games development. Thus began a 7-year journey. The biggest hurdle, besides budget, and I'll get to that as it's one of the most important parts of the story next to Dean Takahashi, was replicating the Flesher Studios' art and animation style. For those in the peanut gallery who don't recognize that name, Flesher Studios was created by Max and Dave Flesher and would be considered one of the premier animation companies that started the golden age of animation. We're talking Betty Boop, Popeye, and the invention of rotoscoping. The brothers Flesher are just as, if not more important than, Walt Disney. And what Chad wanted to do was bring their old techniques back to life. That meant hand drawing, animating, and watercoloring on animation cells. A GameSpot article says it better than I ever could. From painstakingly painting foam mock-ups of background architecture to illustrating by hand the many characters and bosses that are found in Cuphead, Studio MDHR went the extra mile to bring the world of Cuphead to life, but at great cost to their careers and personal lives. On the personal level, Marija left her corporate job to become a project manager and artist for Studio MDHR, and the brothers themselves remortgaged their homes to finance the project. Tyler and Ryan Moldenhauer would also join the studio, effectively making Cuphead a family effort. Circa 2014, the first trailer, more a teaser for Cuphead, was shown at the Xbox press event of Electronic Entertainment Expo. While it was met with cheers, only roughly 40% of the retro run-and-gun game had been finished. Or if we're going off the original plan for Cuphead, only 40% of the base game with none of the expansions touched yet. When asked by KillScreenDaily about the amount of work that the studio had left to do, Chad mentions that there's more frames than any man should draw, and he's reminded of something Trey Parker said while working on Team America World Police. "We had the idea a while back it would be so fun to do a shitty little puppet movie," he told Rolling Stone, "but suddenly this turned into a gigantic puppet movie. If someone showed up now and said, 'Trey, you know I'm a director and I will finish this film for you for $3 million, he would so have $3 million in his pocket. Like that." The team was small to say the least, relying on family, friends, and connections the brothers could make around Canada and across the world. This is where Christopher Madigan makes his reappearance. Around the start of the development cycle, 2013 to be exact, the brothers Moldenhauer approached Madigan to ask if he would be the game's composer. Flabbergasted, and per the words of an article from The Whole Note, out of his comfort zone, Madigan told the brothers no. However, they persisted and he relented. Background-wise, Madigan was only trained in percussion, lacking, like the brothers, any expertise for the area he would be thrust into. The only prior knowledge Madigan had about composing was for a few projects during his college days. With the only guideline given to him being 1930s big band, Madigan was nervous going into the first rehearsal of his newly formed 40-man band. By the end of that rehearsal, he knew that everything was going to be alright, and it was a great relief. Madigan wasn't the only one to be apprehensive either. When some of the band members saw what they were going to be playing, they were shocked. "What's up with these tempos?" was a common phrase said by some of the musicians, but like Madigan, they decided to put their effort into it, with one, trumpeter David Dunlop, saying that Cuphead was a great experience. "You don't get a chance to play intense big band swing on video games very often. Like, never." Cuphead saw initial release on September 29th, 2017 for Steam and Xbone, with following releases on Switch come April 18th, 2019 and PlayStation 4 on July 28th, 2020. Having taken a huge gamble, Studio MDHR was rewarded for their hard work with 1 million sales within the first 2 weeks of the game's release, with current sales as of right now in 2021 near 6 to 7 million. I wouldn't be finished with Cuphead if I didn't bring up the controversies tied to it. 2 articles, one from Kotaku and one from Unwinnable, tried to tie Cuphead to racism based on the idea that because the game is using the Flesher style, which did have caricatures, I won't beat around that bush, it's racist. Despite Marija and the brothers flat out telling both rag sites that they only emulated the style and no one on the team had any complaints of that sort. There's also nothing in the game that points to it being racist, almost like both sites were looking into something that didn't exist. A line from the Unwinnable article also reads that the animation industry is still so white that a roundtable about diversity last year had only white men on it. The video game industry is no better. And all I want to say is, wow. Apparently no one told the writer of the article about Japan. Then there's Dean Takahashi. He reviewed the game for Venture Beat, and while I cautiously trust his information regarding David Cage's last video, and I propose to the Peanut Gallery to do the same with any journalistic work, his Cuphead review is such a laughable display of incompetence. This is a guy who got stuck on the tutorial level of Cuphead. The tutorial. The last bit of information I can cover for Cuphead, the game in this instance, as I do know Netflix did pick up the brand for a cartoon, was that there was going to be a DLC released in 2019 called The Delicious Last Course, but it was pushed back twice. Delay number 1 pushed the release date into 2020, with delay 2 scheduling it for 2021. The version I played was the Steam release. Our tale begins with a book opening, its title, Cuphead, Don't Deal with the Devil. In the story, two brothers, Cuphead and Mugman, end up wandering away from their guardian figure, Elder Kettle, into the rough part of Inkwell Isle, the Devil's Casino. Surprisingly, the two find themselves on a winning streak, but that soon ends when the devil tempts Cuphead into one more game. Losing it, Cuphead and Mugman's souls become property of the devil. Pleading to him, Cuphead and Mugman manage to strike a deal. If the two can collect the souls of other debtors across Inkwell Isle before midnight, the devil will let them go. Otherwise, they will burn in hell for eternity. The two manage to perform such a colossal task and even beat down the devil, freeing everyone on the isle, giving the story a happy ending. To keep this section brief, as do I look like someone who rants about children's cartoons in any capacity, the plot for Cuphead is simple and nostalgic. As a guy who is raised on a bunch of Looney Tunes shorts and Tom and Jerry, I can easily see both the parallels and inspiration for Cuphead's plot. Certain aspects, like the dialogue for example, harken back to an older age, as I don't think anyone uses the word golly or hot dog anymore besides Ricky Rodent. It's a massive send-up to that era of cartoon, and one that brings a smile to my face. I do also like that there is a choice at the end to side with the devil as a funny bad ending. Do I even have to praise the presentation? You can all see and hear it.
Now go!
Much like the game's story, it is a tribute to what is essentially a dead art form using techniques not only from the golden age of animation, as Chad, being the Chad that he is, painstakingly hand-drew every single animation in the game alongside coloring the backgrounds with watercolors, but also the modern era as Photoshop was used to finalize the colors. The end result is a breathtaking snapshot of the birth of cartoon. cartoons. To hammer that point even more, the gameplay's FPS is 60 frames, what should be the industry standard as I know not every game runs at that, while the animation's FPS is 24 frames, which is the standardized frame rate for American film. While in the heat of gameplay you might not notice that as well, your attention will be focused on avoiding death, when you look at it from a distance you can notice the subtle differences. Bringing up the animation, it's so bouncy and expressive, just like how a 1930s to 40s cartoon should be. While the most obvious of inspirations are Betty Boop and the early works of Walt Disney, Cuphead strongly reminds me of the 1940s Superman cartoon, down to the color palette and even the grain effect. It makes sense I bring that film series up as mentioned in the history. The works of Fleischer Studios is the core of Cuphead's visual design philosophy, from the characters to how they animate to everything else in between. I haven't even gotten to the world or character design, which is equally top-notch. The world of Cuphead has, dare I say it again, such a nostalgic feel where I can pinpoint where a location or character draws a correlation to. That includes both past and present, as while Cuphead is steeped in the golden age, that doesn't mean it limits itself to that era. The brothers spent a lot of their childhood playing video games, and for as much as Cuphead is a celebration of animation as a whole, it's also one for video games. Take the opening text for every boss, Cuphead's version of the round-starting fighting games. Being specific, Ribby and Croaks are Ryu and Ken from Street Fighter, with the frog duo even doing the two's taunts from Third Strike. Cala Maria's final phase is a floating Medusa head, a la Castlevania with its floating Medusa heads. How about Grim Matchstick basically being Wily Dragon from Mega Man 2? On the animation side of things, Captain Brinybeard is the spitting image of Bluto from Popeye, and the second phase of Phantom Express, the conductor, is one spooky, scary skeleton. The background of the fight for Phantom Express is also tied to the skeleton dance, which is the actual name of that short. For the last of the references, as I could be here all day sifting through them, as there are a lot to Gunstar Heroes, Contra, Super Mario World, and Street Fighter, King Dice has a Rolodex filled with them. Looks-wise, the basis for King Dice is Cab Calloway, one of the most influential big band and jazz singers ever, who also lent his voice to a few Betty Boop shorts. King Dice's level, deliberately enough, is styled after the Dice Palace from Gunstar Heroes, down to the multiple bosses moving using the roll of a dice and the start over space. Keeping in line with the design philosophy, composer Christopher Madigan stays true to the golden era, conducting a soundtrack filled with jazz, big band, and ragtime tracks. Just like the visuals, it's mind-blowing. I would downright say it is a perfect soundtrack, with many themes sticking with me even after playing. There's the upbeat and iconic Floral Fury, immortalized in the music of Cuphead trailer.
We are. Well, let's just do a rehearsal.
To the slow and smooth Die House vocal track, with vocalist Alana Bridgewater absolutely belting it as King Dice.
I'm Mr. King Dice, I'm the gamest in the land. I never play nice, I'm the devil's right-hand man. I can't let you pass, cause you ain't done everything. Bring me those contracts, come on, bring on to the king. If you haven't finished your task, and you work assiduously, no, I cannot let you pass, don't you mix with me. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with him. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with me. make sure you pay. I don't have time to mess around, and I hope you will agree. Bring me those contracts pronto. Don't you mess with me. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with King Dice. Don't mess with me.
To perhaps one of my favorite tracks in the game, and the one you guys know most of all, the title track Don't Deal with the Devil, which is a reserved piano piece with a barbershop quartet.
Devil's game, and gosh, they paid the price. Paid the price. And now they're fighting for their lives on a mission fraught with dread. And if they proceed but don't succeed, well, the devil will take their heads.
Major props to the backed mass version of the song as well, the Easter egg you get for choosing the bad ending. It's both legitimately creepy and a funny reference to the vinyl record meme of playing one backwards causing subliminal satanic messages to be heard. Cuphead's OST does the thing that I think all great video game soundtracks do. It is listenable outside of the context of the game. For the record, Madigan's work saw him nominated for a Juno Award, and it's easy to see why. I can't overstate enough how much I love this OST. Go out and listen to it, or better yet, buy it on Bandcamp. It's that good. Cuphead is a 2D side-scrolling run-and-gun a la Metal Slug, Gunstar Heroes, and Alien Soldier, where the player must defeat bosses to complete the game. Mechanically, Cuphead is definitely inspired by the latter two as opposed to Metal Slug, though the game has its own spin on what the run-and-gun genre has produced. Starting off, the player has the choice of either playing as Cuphead or Mugman, however this doesn't affect anything and it's just a cosmetic change, as in co-op, player 2 takes the role of Mugman. After deciding who to play as, the player is dropped into Elder Kettle's house to engage with the tutorial. It is optional, but seeing as it does award the player with a coin and structurally for me serves as a way to talk about the controls and what the two brothers are capable of doing, I'll be covering it. Cuphead and Mugman, like with every run and gun ever created, are capable of moving left and right with either the control stick or D-pad. This game is best played with a controller if playing the PC version, so like other PC games I've covered for this channel that work better with a controller, I will be using the Xbox button layout. The Brothers Cup have precision movement, meaning they turn on a dime and have definitive jump arcs. Tighter than the hand cramps I get from playing Monster Hunter on the 3DS.
The claw is a nickname that was given to the uncomfortable position your hands have to be in order to play a Monster Hunter game properly. First you put your thumb on the analog nub, This is how you control your character. See? Now here's where it gets tricky. The camera control is actually on a digital pad, so if you've never heard of the claw, you'll have no idea how to do this. Watch. There, voila. Now you can control your character and the camera with the same hand. Nice.
Besides my dubious joke, the controls feel deliberate and will never cause you issues, so most of yours and my failures within Cuphead will come from honest mistakes, which is the highest regard I can give to any set of controls ever. As mentioned in passing, the two can jump, but they can also dash both on the ground and in the air. This is mostly used to reach further out platforms or to dodge attacks. Speaking of platforms, the player can drop down from them by holding down and pressing the jump button. Perhaps the most important mechanic central to Cuphead is parrying. Pressing the jump button while in the air will initiate a parry. Parrying is not automatic and does require timing to do, with early and late parries almost certainly leading to the player being damaged, but pulling one off not only negates any pink projectiles but earns the player a point in the super meter. Notice my phrasing though. Only objects that are pink can be parried. To help with this, every parryable projectile or object glows brighter than the eventual supernova our sun will suffer, so it's easy to keep track of what is and isn't parry fodder. Parrying also has its role in activating level-specific items such as switches that change gravity. In these cases, super meter is not built up. Since I've covered most of the basics when it comes to the running aspect of Cuphead, I'll move over to the gunning aspects. The two liquid holders are able to fire in 8 directions as well as lock themselves into firing at one direction. That's all I have to say about the shooting, as it's quite simple. Located on the bottom left of the screen is player 1's health and super meter. Player 2's is on the bottom right. Naturally, Cuphead and Mugmen can only be hit 3 times before they die. This forces a level or boss restart, as this game has no checkpoints in any of its stages in single player, but in co-op, any player who's still alive can attempt to revive any dead ones by parrying a ghost. A player's ghost will slowly move up screen before vanishing off screen, but if a still alive player manages to parry it, the dead player gets brought back to life with 1 hit point. Take note that when a player dies and is revived multiple times, the speed of the ghost gets faster, making subsequent saves harder to pull off. Super meter is built up by either damaging enemies or bosses, in which it slowly builds up until the player has 1 stock, or by parrying, which always awards a player with 1 part of the super meter. The player can hold on to 5 supers, though I will return back to this subject as supers are dependent on a few factors. Cuphead and Mugman do have a different set of controls when in the flying bosses of the game, but the only real noteworthy thing to bring up is that the dash is replaced with a shrink that speeds up the player and makes their hitbox smaller but cuts down the range of their projectiles by around 3/4. Stages are broken up into 4 categories: the overworld, run and gun, mausoleums, and bosses. The overworld map is the level hub for the game. On it are a variety of NPCs that the player can interact with, as well as the item shop. Like with supers, I'll cover the shop later, as its function is tied to the coins the player can find in the run and gun stages. Cuphead has a non-linear level system, as for a majority of the game, the player can tackle any stage or boss in any order. This isn't the case all the time, as new sections of Inkwell Isle will only open up once a player defeats a prerequisite stage, but there's quite a bit of freedom when dealing with the levels within Cuphead. Run and gun stages require the player to reach from point A in a stage to point B, all the while having to deal with a variety of obstacles such as enemies, mini-bosses, and level hazards. While this is the main goal within these types of levels, in each one are 5 coins. Coins, though optional, allow the player to buy items from the shop, such as different shot types and trinkets that can change the effects of Cuphead and Mugman's dash, parry, or base stats. These items must be equipped before a stage begins. Also optional in the run and gun stages is killing enemies. Sure enough, every one of them can be completed with a pacifist ranking, unlocking black and white mode. After completing a run and gun stage, the player is taken to the ranking screen where their performance is ranked on time, HP, parry, and coins. Each level has what I would consider a par time, it being around 2 minutes, as when the player exceeds it, their end level ranking takes a hit. Likewise, taking damage, not getting 3 parries, or the 5 coins within a stage also hurt the ranking. Highest rank for a run and gun stage is A+ or P, with the lowest being D-. Boss stages are ranked as well, but instead of having coins, they have supers used as a category and are ranked from D- to S. Besides for a few achievements, rankings are superfluous besides showing off how good or bad you are at the game. I happen to average around the A to B rank territory, thus proving how not shit I am at video games. Here's a montage of failures to completely discredit myself. Boss stages are the meat and potatoes of the game. Unlike with the run and guns, when starting up a boss stage, the player has a choice of either simple or regular difficulty, with a third option in the form of expert being unlocked once the player beats the game for the first time. To spare the details, never play on simple, as it doesn't reward you with a boss's soul contract when you beat them on that difficulty. Bosses are multi-phased affairs that require the player to understand how each attack a boss can throw out works to successfully beat them. Typically, each boss is around 3 to 4 stages, with later sections being more complex than the last, and each phase can have around 1 to 5 attacks. If a phase has more than one attack, the boss will cycle through them randomly. Take Cagney Carnation. When his fight begins, he has a chance of either using his lunge or Gatling attack first, then he will proceed to cycle through his options in a nondescript order. Though bosses do not have specific weaknesses like an alien soldier, certain shot types are more effective than others depending on the boss's behavior. Anytime during a boss or run and gun stage, the player can pause the game, allowing them to handle matters outside of the game that requires their attention. People have lives outside of video games? Or to restart the stage. Since getting hit only once means a perfect score is lost, you bet your ass I use that function a lot to get worthwhile takes. The last of the stages is the Mausoleums, where a player must protect a vase from ghosts by parrying them. Completing these stages, while optional, unlocks super arts, and there are 3 in total. Regular supers eat 1 point away from the super meter, while super arts use the whole entire bar. I could be here all day talking about how much I love the presentation. Seeing as I've already done that in that tab, I'll move to the gameplay specifics that I really enjoy, my first stop being the amount of customizability you have when it comes to trinkets, shot types, and super arts. There are a good number of shot types, 6 in total, ranging from the reliable pea shooter to the tricky to use but heavily damaging lobber, trinkets, the smoke bomb that makes dashing have iframes to an automatic first parry, and super arts. 3 in total, with one being a beam attack, another being invincibility, and the last being a spinning ghost that can lead to interesting combinations, both in single and multiplayer. They honestly change how a player approaches a boss, and while I did say they don't have legitimate weaknesses, this isn't Mega Man, experimentation is a key aspect I think Studio MDHR wanted the player to do. You could stick with Pea Shooter and Chaser, as both are serviceable in any scenario, but there might be better options. The thing is, it is always easy to see during any of the bosses where a select shot type would have the advantage. Using Von Bonbon as an example, the first 3 phases are suitable for any shot type, but come the final one, the player is forced to run away from her and her moving castle. That makes Roundabout the best option, as you don't have to worry about facing the Baroness to deal damage to her, leaving you open to focus on dodging projectiles, as phase 4 of that fight is the most hectic part of the fight. Grim Matchstick is the same way, just replace Roundabout with Lobber due to his predilection to stay low to the ground. There's no better feeling than using the right shot type to easily speed through a phase of a fight. Take my obliteration of Beppy the Clown's 3rd phase via spread shot. The run and gun stages aren't left out either, as I think that it's these stages where the level of customizability reaches its zenith. Invisible dashing might be good on paper, but what if a stage has precision platforming? Suddenly, not being able to see Cuphead or Mugman when they dash is a detriment. Added health seems good, but now you're doing less damage, making options like Chaser nigh unusable. Going back to the feeling of elation when finding the right shot type to deal with a boss, I could extend that to defeating one after spending a large amount of time failing. Cuphead was going for that level of Nintendo hard, and it captures it perfectly, down to the relief of finally beating a boss that has been giving you trouble. And unlike those old games, Cuphead is entirely fair with its challenge. It never tries to dick the player over with cheap tactics or unavoidable nonsense. Well, most of the time, but I'll go over that boss in the bad section. What helps is that most of the bosses are not overtly long. Dying doesn't mean you've lost much progress, and restarting is so quick and easy that reaching back up to the point where you died is trivial. It means that yes, a player can brute force their way to victory, but choosing to instead learn how a boss's phase works can lead to that perfect score. And while rankings are empty, striving to get that A+ or S ranking is an accomplishment well deserved. Time for a couple shoutouts now, as since Cuphead is a game of bosses, it would be obvious for me to pick my favorites, with the Devil probably being at the top of the list. Not only does his fight capture such a climactic climactic feeling as Phase 2 and 3 see Cuphead and Mugman face off with a giant version of him in the depths of hell, I think he crystallizes the game's focus on experimentation. During each part of the fight, the player can see what shot or super would work perfectly, as during certain attacks and lull periods, the devil becomes vulnerable to particular options. There's nothing like shredding his health down with Super Art 3 during Phase 2 or punishing his spider or dragon form in Phase 1 with Spread, Roundabout, or Lobber. Cagney is another boss who is high on the list, and while he might not do anything remotely special as I find him to be one of the easier bosses, it's the combination of the music and the way he's animated that makes the fight a joy to engage with. From his dumb hand dancing matching the tempo of his theme to his goofy and over-the-top facial expressions, Cagney is the most recognizable boss in the game to me. There are also the secret bosses, which there are 3 of. This section might be the most controversial, definitely because of differing opinions. What I find to be subpar, someone else might not, and seeing as Cuphead is a game of bosses, everyone takes to one differently. In saying this, I don't find any of the bosses to be bad. There are some that can be aggravating though, like all the flying bosses. What makes me dislike them out of all the bosses in the game lies in 2 factors: length and complexity. The average phase amount for a flying boss is around 4 phases, which is on the longer side compared to many of the other bosses in Cuphead. There are some non-shmup bosses that have 4 phases, like Sally's stage play or Beppy the Clown, and while I do dislike the length of those fights as it makes restarting not fun to do, why I don't find them to be as annoying compared to the flying bosses lies in the other half of the equation: complexity. Because the player is able to freely move around in any direction during the R-type inspired sections, that means bosses' attacks need to be able to hit them from a variety of angles, thus transforming the run and gun game into that of Silver Surfer. The amount of projectiles that can be on screen during any one of these bosses can be overwhelming at times, which doesn't play well with how long these bosses can be. There's a reason why I don't play Toho, but at least there your hitbox is smaller than your character sprite. Every issue I have with the flying bosses all culminate in the form of Dr. Cal's robot. Phase-wise, he only has 3, but it feels more like 4 because of how Phase 1 operates. During the first phase, the player has to destroy 3 armaments on the robot before blowing up its heart. Each of the weapons has a different attack. The antenna laser tracks the player and fires a beam that blocks off parts of the screen as well as the player's projectiles. The chest releases a permeable robot that generates an electric field, and the abdomen releases 4 smaller robots that travel across the screen in a zigzag manner. All of these attacks are not fun to deal with due to how mentally taxing it is to keep track of them all, but it gets worse the more the robot is damaged. Once a weapon has been destroyed, it gets replaced with a different attack, so the laser becomes a scrap spread shot. The chest switches over to the arms, which can either attack the player directly or use a magnet to hold them in place, and the body starts releasing homing bombs that explode after a few seconds. That is a total of 6 attacks to be mindful of, with different combinations depending on what part of the robot is destroyed first. Eliminating the laser seems like the best course of action at first, but now try dodging spread shot while robots are zigzagging. It says a lot that the second and last phase of Dr. Cal's robot are much easier than the first, though Phase 3 does devolve into Baby's first bullet hell. Still on the subject of length, King Dice is the most disappointing of the bosses solely because of his gimmick, the dice board. Instead of a climactic fight with the devil's right-hand man, you're playing the worst level from Gunstar Heroes. No, seriously, King Dice's Dice Palace from Gunstar Heroes with all of its annoying trappings. Depending on the player's roles, the stage can last upward of 10 minutes because every non-safe space the player lands on forces them to fight a boss. A boss that is thankfully simple, but it's still a boss. There is also a start over space, forcing the player back to the beginning of the board and possibly running into any bosses that were skipped over. On the flip side, once you get to King Dice, he only has 1 attack and it's simple to dodge if you've been engaging with the parry mechanic. quick. Perhaps if the two parts of the boss were separated, with the dice board being a run and gun stage that unlocks the King Dice boss fight, I wouldn't be let down, but as it stands, the penultimate boss is a little bit sad, especially in comparison to the finale. Rounding out the bosses, Baroness von Bonbon suffers many of the same problems facing the likes of Cal and Dice, as she too is one of the longer fights with a lot of patterns to keep track of, just with the added debuff of randomization. If I had one last statement to add here, there are a few boss attacks that I do find to be a bit grating. For as much as I love the final boss, anytime the devil starts using magic always leads to a bad time. While I can easily avoid his bouncing ball attack, and I would argue next to his dragon and spider forms is his easiest attack to dodge, his homing projectile and flame spells leave me with a serious case of brain damage. It's as if any remaining intelligence stored in my head leaks out as soon as those two attacks come out. Much like Hotline Miami, Cuphead is one of the premier indie games that I recommend to people. It oozes charm and style and is one of the best run-and-gun games to date, easily standing up to Metal Slug and its contemporaries. There are minor quibbles that I have with Cuphead, such as certain bosses and attacks, but they are such nitpicks compared to everything else. Steam or Switch are the best way to play, at least to me.